We're discussing the Derech HaYeshorah of the Rambam. What is the straight and narrow path? What exactly is that? Is that location? What is that? Derech HaYeshorah he mida beinunus shebechol dea v'deo. It is, the word mida means a measure. It's the measure exactly in the middle, which is equidistant from each extreme of that particular characteristic. Bikol hadeo sheish lodom. Be exactly, as we gave the example with the pendulum, exactly in the middle. You could go to the left extreme, to the right, but there's an exact center point. That is derech yeshorah. The middle point, which is equidistant from both extremes, that is the straight and narrow. Why? What is that? When you balance something, what's balance? It's not weighted more to the right. It's not weighted more to the left. It's exactly balanced. When a person, inclination-wise, predilection-wise, characteristic-wise, is balanced. So when you approach anything, you're not swayed, not to the right, not to the left. The only way you could be swayed is only through your intellect, based on the way you perceive something, but it's purely intellect. It's not based on your inborn inclination or predilection or acquired. That's the derech hayeshorah. That's the straight path, straight and narrow. It is the characteristic which is distant from both ends, both extremes. Richok shaver, an equidistant. Ve'eno krova lo lazu v'lo lazu. It's not closer to one more than the other. The Rambam is balancing it to be perfectly centered. Now, we speak about a person, he's a balanced person. He's well balanced. We've mentioned that a person who sells anything, and it's determined by weights and measures. Measures have to be exact. If it's an ounce, the weight has to be an ounce weight. If it's less or more, even an item more, you're not getting accurate weight. Otherwise, the evaluation is not accurate. You have a rope. It's interesting. The Talmud tells us, in the old days, how did they measure a dunam or an acre? They would have a rope that was that length, and then they would measure it out. They take that rope, let's say it was a half a dunam, half an acre, and they would stretch it on the ground, and then from that point they go to the other, and then that's how they would measure. They would measure land. What about in the winter? If the rope gets wet, when the rope's wet, it could be stretched. So you can have that rope, which is, let's say, 100-foot rope, because of it's wet, and when you pull it taut, you may stretch it, and it's more than 100 feet. Or let's say it constricts at a certain time. It shrinks. So what's supposed to be the 100-yard rope or 100-foot rope is not a 100-foot rope. So when you measure the land, you're not giving the person an accurate measurement, and that rope doesn't qualify as a measuring tool to measure the dimension of that piece of property. The same thing. Talmud tells us that if you have weights and you use them over time, let's say you're a butcher, and the butcher's hands have fat on it, and he uses the weight to measure the meat, or whatever he weighs. A residue of that meat gets on those weights. It may be just a film. The weight is not accurate any longer. So what you have to do is you keep the weight in a case, like a leather case, and you only take it out of that case when you use it, and then and every once in a while you have to clean that weight. You have to scrub it, because if you don't scrub it, you're going to have that residue of fat on it, and that slight residue of fat makes a difference whether you can have accurate weight. It's very interesting. When God created this world, he created the world with an objective. What's the objective? That man, being a creature of choice, our deeds, our good deeds, advance existence. If we utilize existence as God wants it to be utilized, you perfect existence. If you utilize existence to do things which are detrimental to existence, which is against God's will, because only God knows what brings perfection, what doesn't bring perfection, you're diminishing existence. But the objective is we have to reach a critical point of perfection. And once we reach that level of spiritual perfection, God says the world has met its purpose and objective, and he's ready for real time. And he will reveal himself, all evil will be expunged from existence. And this is what we say, God will be the only recognized, only king. Nothing will exist outside of him. And those who are worthy, because they contributed towards that perfection, they will be there then. Because they contributed. They're crucial players to bring about the objective of creation. But you realize, ultimately, the world will arrive where it's supposed to arrive. As they say, by hook or by crook, the world will arrive at a point of perfection. We have 6,000 years. The world is only meant to exist 6,000 years. By the year 6,000, this world will reach its level of perfection. But how? How do you do it? Mankind has chosen to go south, not north. How's it done? We talk about is reward and punishment. Sometimes the pain can be so bad. A person eats irresponsibly. And he eats to a point where he has a pain, he can't ingest another iota of food. So what does the person do? The person starts thinking, something. If I want to rid myself of this pain or of this illness, I better start behaving responsibly. Otherwise, the pain's not going away, and ultimately, I'm going to be compromised by the pain, maybe die. So when the pain gets intense enough, all of a sudden we start seeing the light of day. As they say, I see, said the blind man. I see. What happened until now? Because until now you thought it's the way you understand it. It's not the way you understand it. It's the way God wants you to understand it. So God wants you to come upon truth. When you see truth and understand truth, then you live within the context of truth. Now, if the world itself has gone south for a while, how does God turn that rudder that goes north? It goes upstream, not downstream. We're headed off the falls. How do you get it to go up the falls? God every day has to tweak existence. We say every day in the blessing, two blessings before the Shema, Hamachadish tu v'chol yom tov ma'aseh reishis. Every day God renews the act of creation, meaning based on where the world has to go, he continuously, I'll give you an example. You have a rocket. You have the Challenger. The Challenger, to be able to leave the atmosphere of the Earth, you need booster rockets. Without the booster rocket, it can't break out of the atmosphere of the Earth. So you have booster rockets. Let's say you're going downstream. And the only way you go upstream, you need a surge of energy to get you to go up the falls rather than over the falls. God will provide that surge of energy. What about you doing well? And he wants you to accelerate. He will enrich the world with power to bring about greater levels of clarity to maximize on your success. What about the world is going south and they're not going north? God will bring about a level of pain that the world would become defunct and deficient, where people say, you know something, we better start searching for water, because if we don't find the water, we're not going to survive it. And you come to that realization. So every day, there are nuances of difference that have to exist within existence for the world to go in the right direction. Because to arrive at that end, the end game is perfection. But unfortunately, the world is not equidistant from both ends. If we would be equidistant for both extremes, we'd see it right. That's called tunnel vision. And you see it. But if you're always distracted, what do? You know, it's interesting. I'm not an expert in ophthalmology, but there's certain ophthalmologists, you know, sometimes people, the two eyes don't work alike. And you have to fool the brain so both eyes should work together. And you know what that's called? So what they do is they put a prism in the lens, that when the prism, the lens is, when you look through that, it sends a message to the brain through the optic nerve. They just see it not exactly where you sing it, but you're fooling the brain, so now both eyes are going to work together. Otherwise, you see double. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Larry. You see, if you had a detached retina many times, you overcame it, you've been through the thick and thin of it, then you appreciate what I'm talking about. But I can tell you, I have in my glasses, in my lenses, prisms, because I had this problem. There was a time, at one time, I started to see slightly double. And not every ophthalmologist has that ability to know exactly how to embed this prism in the lens. It's not something you could see by looking at the lens. You have to put it under that microscope to be able to see the prism exactly where to put it in the lens, because the brain has to be deceived. Otherwise, the eyes don't operate together. Each eye by itself is fine, but together they don't work together. The world has to function a certain way. So God has to keep tweaking existence. Even if we reach an equidistant point, we're exactly in the middle. But you know, we as human beings, we vacillate. Today, full speed ahead, raring to go, spiritually. Tomorrow, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed. You're a little lethargic. You had an experience which turned you off a little bit. The rabbi didn't say good morning with that big smile to you. Yeah. And you're a little perturbed after your dedication to the synagogue, what you've done over the years and the money you gave. I think he should have picked that phone and called me first. Do I have to pick up the phone and call him? So everybody has ego issues. Every one of us have ego issues. The things that turn us on and turn us off. People get excited. The richest man in the synagogue, he's on Forbes 98. And when I came out of synagogue on Shabbat, he said to me, "Good morning, Jonathan." You know what I felt like? I felt like $1 million. Not the guy ever gave you a dime in your life. He never invited you for anything. But he said, "Good morning" to me. Do you know what it means to be acknowledged by this man? You know, if you got an ego issue, it means a lot. But if you don't have an ego issue, you know, don't delude yourself. Don't get yourself all excited. You know, you want to meet people they have both feet on the ground. Not that they're flying. And one time people used to fly when they took LSD. And they took LSD, they thought they were flying. They went through the window. That's what happened. I'm only saying this, facetiously. People get so caught up with their egos, and they're so starving for that acknowledgement, they'll turn the world over. They should be noticed. But these people, they're not equally balanced. If you're balanced, if it has value, you do it. Doesn't have value, you don't do it. But what's value? Value is seeing it right. When you see it right, that's value. You see it wrong, you may believe it has value, but it has no value. That's why it's so important to be at that equidistant point that your inborn inclinations, predilection shouldn't sway you to the right or to the left. That's called balance. Now, intellectually, now you make a decision. Now you're in the driver's seat. We live in a society of mediocrity. Why do we live in a society of mediocrity? Because when the bar is set, unfortunately, it's set so low. So therefore, what's considered achievement at one time was considered bordering on failure. That's the reason why we live in a society of mediocrity, because you strive to be better. But if better is, you barely could creep under the bar, so how good could you be? And this is a true story. They ask a young man in shul on the day they read the Torah, after they finish the reading, they close it, and there's an honor, it's called Hagbah. The word Hag means lift the Torah. You lift the Torah up, and you show it in every direction that people should see the writing on the scroll, on the parchment. They give it to an 18-year-old boy. He's on the wrestling team in whatever school he goes to. They give him Hag, he picks it up, and he nearly drops it. You hear this? People come running, they catch it. He sits down, wraps it up, and they say to him, "Good job, boy. Good job, boy." Good job, boy. You almost dropped it. He should have practiced before, and if he was questioned, you shouldn't have gone. Of course, the seriousness of dropping a Torah is very serious. What do you tell the kid? Good boy. Good job. You pat people, you stroke people for what? For waking up in the morning, getting out of bed? If that's considered achievement, you understand, the guy hasn't even left the cave yet, and he has another 6,000 miles to go, and he hasn't put his shoes on, and the road is filled with glass and rocks that'll lacerate his feet. Good job, you got out of bed. Where are you in life? You're nowhere. You can't even pick up the unemployment check because you would never work to even qualify for an unemployment check. That's where we're at today. I remember when I was in elementary school, I had a teacher who was an observant man, English teacher. His name was Mr. Einhorn. And he came from German descent. He lived in England. He spoke with a slight English accent. And you used to hear certain expressions from in the United States you didn't hear. This is the 50s. He would call it busman holiday, busman's holiday. You ever hear that expression today? And he used to tell us, young men, you got to put your shoulder to the wheel. The American version is you got to put your shoulder to the grindstone. Those were expressions at one time. You want that wheel to move, you got to put your shoulder. You ever see pictures of slaves where they pushed a millstone, and they pushed their shoulders against that horizontal log, and they pushed, and it would go around, and that's how they would mill the wheat. That's putting your shoulder to the wheel, giving it every ounce of your effort. That's doing your best. What do you think kids today, they start a project, the parents paid already full tuition, they're taking the course for a week, they drop out of the course. Whatever they start, they never finish. Why? Because they were never taught responsibility. They never were taught what is and what's not. Because naturally, inclination, a person is naturally lethargic, lazy. Nobody's motivated. You're only motivated for what you want to do. I want to be a success. I want to be a rich man. But you realize without an education, you're not going to be that. Without some level of acumen or experience, you're not going to be that. I had a friend, his father, he originally came from Germany. And when Kaiser Wilhelm was the Kaiser of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, even before the Nazis, was a rabid anti-Semite. He was an arrogant son of a gun, and he only tolerated Jews because he needed the Jews. So this person's grandfather was in the scrap business, scrap metal. Germans are in ore scrap, and they were in the metal commodities business, many Germans. And Phillips brothers, they had years ago. So his father, his grandfather, would actually, the government, he would make certain munitions for the government because he would provide the metal, whatever metal they needed for the munitions. When the Germans, the Nazis, came to power at the beginning, they confiscated everything from them. And that's when they left Germany, way before the Holocaust. But they saw the handwriting on the wall. He moved to Baltimore. And if you ever take the railroad into Baltimore, before you come to Penn Station, Baltimore, you pass scrap yards. Blocks and blocks of scrap yards. Those scrap yards are owned by Jews. And this person, because the way he was, his experience in Europe, he was an expert in scrap. And he, although he didn't own it, but because he was so vital to the business, he had a partnership. They gave him a partnership in the business because he made the difference whether that business would be profitable or not for them, or more profitable. Okay. His son was a friend of mine, a little younger, and he graduated Johns Hopkins University. And his father wanted to come into the business and learn the scrap business. He had almost a perfect average from Johns Hopkins, but he was going to go into metals. Now, how do you teach a person metals? What is and what's not? He had him work in a scrap yard, sifting scrap with his hands, with the unintelligent laborers, shoulder to shoulder, in all this scrap, and he had to wear some kind of gloves that he shouldn't actually cut his hands on the scrap. And he spent about 2 years in the scrap yard, learning exactly the various types of metals. And then he had an office next to his father. But he had to be boots on the ground, what to do, then we talk about. And he understood it. Especially he was a Yeki. You know, Yekis understand this, Germans. He was raised with what? With order, precision, and nothing happens by itself. But at one time, all society understood this. You know, you got to pull yourself up with your own bootstraps. And if you don't do it yourself, nobody's going to do it for you. You know, there used to be an expression, my father used to say it over. Today, the government, it's from cradle to grave. They cover everything. Cradles to grave. You know, and they don't put you on Potter's Field. They'll put you in Arlington Cemetery next to the five-star general, although the person never did a thing in his life. But he's buried next to Eisenhower, you know, in Arlington. I don't know where Eisenhower's buried, I'm not sure. But again, even if we're equidistant and where we should be, there's always a human being always vacillates, and we have to retweak. You know, the government has a certain agency that they check scales for weights and measures to make sure that scales, and every few months you get a certain label that they paste on the scale. That means it's been checked recently. Like you have inspectors from the city, they inspect the foundations, roofs, whatever it is, to make sure things are safe, to make sure things are honest. You have to check always the scale to make sure it's accurate. But it was checked 3 months ago. You know, things go off balance. If the machine goes off balance, human beings for sure go off balance. So even though we're at the equidistant point, what we call the derech yeshara, the straight and narrow path, you don't always stay on the straight and narrow path. You always need tweaking to get back there. No, you drive down a highway. you're in the center lane. As much as you're in center lane, you veer slightly. And every once in a while, you have to make sure you're going not too close to the adjoining lane. And today they have all kinds of, you have buzzers going off the car if you get too close, because that's how out of touch, how not in touch and not cognizant where we should be. So if you need the buzzer to go off to keep you straight when you're driving, you can imagine when you without the car, what sets you straight? How do you know when you're going off? You have a fight with your wife, God forbid. You know, the guy doesn't show up. He goes out with his friends. He forgets about his wife, as if he's a single guy who comes home. He hears the music. His wife gives him over the head. He's not going out so quick. She puts him in the doghouse for the next 2 weeks.